Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel, the Founders Panel. We are very grateful that we have such esteemed panelists to discuss everything you'd wanted to know about DataOps and clear up any confusion you might have at this point. So without further ado, I'd like each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's just go quickly around the room, so to speak. Maybe Matthew, you could start us out.
Sure, Matthew Carroll, I'm CEO of Immuta. Immuta is a data platform where we're automating regulatory controls on top of cloud compute and legacy database systems. My background, just for whatever it's worth, is I worked a decade in the U.S. intelligence community, 6 tours, Afghanistan, Iraq. Spent most of my career going after tier 1 Al-Qaeda targets and using data to do that.
Impressive. Chris?
Well, I wasn't in the military. I was in the Peace Corps for 2.5 years. Does that count? I went after high target students. So yeah, nothing as brave as that, but I lived in a hut. Then that was a long time ago. I'm actually a technical guy. I spent 15 years in software and then 15 years running data and analytic teams. And the problems and sort of frustrations I had were poured into the idea of DataKitchen and what we had originally called Agile Analytic Ops and DevOps for data. And then we called it Analytic Ops for a while, but if you shorten Analytic Ops down, it makes a really terrible word. So we started off DataOps 4 years ago. Yeah, we're a bootstrap company, about 50 employees, about 8.5 million ARR, 10 million in revenue.
Rye, you're up.
Sure, yeah. I'm Rye Walker, a founder and CTO of Astronomer. I'm also a committer on the Airflow project. Our company helps organizations adopt Airflow, and we're a remote first global company with about 90 employees now.
Terrific. Justin?
I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. Starburst is the company behind an open source project called Trino, formerly known as Presto, if you've heard of Presto. My co-founders are the creators of that project. And today we offer a query engine that allows you to access data anywhere. So it's kind of like the top half of a database.
Last but not least, Kunal?
Thank you, Wayne. It's great to be with my peers here and good to see everybody's healthy and safe. I'm Canal Agrawal, co-founder and CEO of Unravel Data. And our mission is to radically simplify data ops. We do that through a end-to-end observability platform, which also does automatic optimization of the data pipelines and the underlying systems themselves.
Terrific. So now you've met everyone. I should probably introduce myself, Wayne Eckerson. I'm president of Eckerson Group, which is a research and consulting firm specializing in data and analytics. So the first question is basically 2 questions. We want you to place your company. You're all data ops vendors of one sort or another. If you could place your company in the data ops ecosystem, I think that would really help our audience, one, better understand what data ops is and the range, but also better understand and get to know your companies as well. So I won't pick on people now. I'll just let you guys jump in and first come, first serve here.
I think we should do the same order. Matthew, we'll let you lead.
All right, yeah, I'll be the brave one. Yeah, I mean, if you look at listen, I thought Kunal and team have Unravel has this infinity loop. I thought they did a great job with that. I mean, if you think about where we are in that is this concept of as you're doing extract and load. Once you get to that transform stage, the question is how do you apply the right rules and the right controls on that data? So those who have the authority to be able to look at that data. The data is only viewed in the correct way. So whether it's masking, redaction, et cetera. So where we kind of fit in is this it's almost this interpoint where it's monitoring as well as operating on the data. So operating meaning, can I run my query? Can I join up the data? And are we applying the right masking redaction rules? Why are they asking this question of the data, that purpose? And then so those logs, once they query it and those rules are applied, feed into the monitoring. So it's auditability of, hey, we proved like for HIPAA, it's anonymized to a certain set, or we redacted these 18 columns, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the continuous optimization, because, well, let's be honest, data engineers are divas, and they want everything to perform perfectly. So we have to feed into the performance engines and natively integrate with, you know, customers and companies like Justin with Starburst.
Yeah, so I was actually on your site today, Matthew. I was very impressed with what you guys offer. Very granular access control features that I hadn't really seen many other places. So definitely an up-and-coming product that I think everyone should be looking at.
Yeah, thanks. It's what happens when you work with too many lawyers in the government, you know.
All right, I guess we're going to go in order. So Chris, who is also the head chef, I guess, at DataKitchen, this will be a good one.
Yeah, so I'll try to make some cheesy food metaphors. I think one of the challenges with DataOps is it's sort of hard to define. And one of the reasons that it's hard to define is it's kind of a set of upstream problems that a lot of people in data and analytics haven't focused on. And so in some ways, my company and our product helps them with things like, how do you get things from your employee's head, a data scientist, a data engineer, into production quickly? And once it's in production, how do you find out if it actually works? And, you know, is it broken? And then the fact that there's just so many people involved in data and analytics, and there's all these new terms of data scientist and data engineer and data governance, how do you get them all to collaborate? So at the end of the day, you can actually deliver value to your customer. And so, you know, we have a software product that does a lot of different things in DataOps, but one thing it doesn't do is actually do the work that you need to do data and analytics. And there's just a ton of great tools out there.
All right, Rye, your turn.
Yeah, sure. So Astronomer is on the far left of the infinity symbol, orchestration. We like to call it programmatic orchestration to sort of differentiate ourselves from low code or no code tools. You know, Airflow and Astronomer, we're using code and Python to define workflows, which allows the user to leverage Python metaprogramming techniques, all the Python packages, and there's about 700 pre-built Airflow modules now for various systems in a rapidly growing ecosystem of other integrations. So we like to say, like, by writing code, you can build abstractions that others in the organization can plug into with an absolutely minimized input. And, you know, just automating the myriad of data pipelines, whether it's data processing or ML retrainings, et cetera. It's just becoming a pretty, pretty important part of an organization's data play.
You know, I came across Airflow from a guy named Joe Caserta, who wrote the book on ETL with Ralph Kimball. Do you know Joe? You may be listening here. And then a number of years ago, I heard that he's now developing ETL pipelines in Python using Airflow. I'm like, what is this Airflow? So you guys are obviously a key player in this new emerging market.
Yes.
Justin, you're up.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we play in the phase where you're deployed and trying to get value out of that data, and we work with a whole host of BI tool vendors and various other analytic applications and application developers who all speak SQL at the end of the day and turn that SQL query into fast results. And I think for us, at least, what makes us unique is it's basically doing data warehousing analytics, but without the need to necessarily store that all in one single data warehouse. And that gives you the ability to basically access the data regardless of where it lives and join tables across different systems or make good use of the data lake, as many are doing today.
Yeah, your area is extremely hot right now. SQL on object stores, but anything else in a distributed, virtualized manner. It's you guys kind of were the inventors of that, at least in the big data space. So great, Kunal.
Yeah, in a previous life, Justin also had Hadapt, which is as I remember, the first SQL on top of Hadoop.
SQL on Hadoop, exactly. Yeah. So I've been doing this too long, I guess is what that.
But it's never going to go away, is it? SQL. Yeah, so Unravel at the end of the day monitors and optimizes data pipelines and applications and the systems that they run on. So it really helps data engineers in the create phase so that they can reduce the defects. It helps in the deployment phase so that inefficient code is not hitting the production systems. And if you think about managing a production, a live big data system out there, there's so many applications and pipelines and users on top of it. So it helps you there by providing you proactive alerts to help you get to the root cause of these problems very quickly. And there it's primarily used by the SRE teams, the platform engineers, the data engineers, really anybody that's creating these applications and has to scale them out in production as well.
Great. Well, thanks for that short intro to all of your companies. I think now we want to start diving down into the real meat of the situation. If you could each provide an example of a customer and how they used your product to solve a problem, I think that would really help illuminate your role in this DataOps ecosystem. Why don't we go in reverse this time? Let's start with Kunal.
Way to switch up the order. To give an example of DBS Bank, which is headquartered in Singapore, and what DBS has been doing is, for a number of years, they've been creating what they call intelligent banking applications. And they run a pretty complex modern data architecture completed with, Kafka and Spark, and I'm sure they're using a bunch of SQL technologies on top of it as well. And the challenge here was that their data teams, which, by the way, as we all know, are very hard to get, very expensive, they were spending about 30–40% of their time not building these applications, but actually, debugging them or making sure that they run properly. And what they saw was, the main cause for all of this was either inefficient code, poor configuration settings, and then, not all of the data engineers are efficient in the underlying systems themselves. So maybe great at SQL, they may be great at R, they may be great at Python, but don't necessarily understand how the underlying systems like Kafka and Spark and all of these pieces work. So knowingly, unknowingly, they had inefficient code that was running in production. And not only were their applications not performing well, they started to affect everything else that was happening on that environment too. So all the other data pipelines, all the other applications started to miss their SLAs, started to slow down, and then this entire real estate became, rather expensive to run. So what DBS did with Unravel is they deployed Unravel in two stages. The first was really as a checkpoint, where all the applications would have to go through a health check before they were deployed in production. And they have a certain scoring matrix, which is based on a number of factors like the duration of the application, the number of inefficiencies it has, the number of errors, how expensive it was. And if it did not meet a certain threshold, those applications were not allowed to be promoted. And in that case, those developers, the data engineers would have to come inside and then use Unravel's capabilities to fix those problems, to get the health score up so that only healthy code was then put into production. And then the second piece was to then maintain all of these different moving pieces and all these different data pipelines together. So they have this single pane of glass really to see their machine learning workloads, their analytical workloads, their SQL queries, their dashboards, their ETL pipelines all in one place. Because at the end of the day, they have to make sure that it all synchronizes and works well together. So that's a use case in which DBS Bank was able to reduce troubleshooting time, was able to make sure that their applications are running on time every time, and ultimately be able to scale their production-grade applications in a cost-effective manner.
Yeah, so critical to making sure the whole thing works as advertised, right?
Exactly, because these data applications are no longer a science project, right? They are in production, they're business critical stuff, and not having the SLAs being met has a direct business impact now.
Absolutely. Great. Justin, you have an example?
Sure. Yeah, and that was a great example. DBS is certainly a visionary in Southeast Asia in terms of pushing technologies forward and being very progressive as a financial institution. One of the examples I like to give is Comcast, and the reason I like it is because it kind of touches on everything that we do. Customers typically come to us either to access data in a data lake, again, it could be object storage, it could be Hadoop, or to federate across data sources. And in the case of Comcast, it was a bit of both. So they have viewing behavior. Basically, every time you hit that remote control, that gets captured into a Hadoop-based data lake. And separately, in a Teradata system, they've got the billing data. They've had that billing data forever. That's sort of their core data. And this viewing behavior is something newer, something that they wanted to be able to actually correlate with that billing behavior to try to understand how the shows that you watch impact the value as a customer, and then be able to do cross-sell and upsell based on those viewing behavior, the shows that you watch. Is an ESPN viewer more valuable than a Bravo viewer? That kind of thing. So what they were doing at the time was actually moving a lot of data back and forth between these two systems with a number of ETL processes and creating data copies. And for the data warehouse, they didn't really want to expand the footprint on that data warehouse. It's very expensive. And so they were kind of struggling with how to get these insights in any timely way. And what they did was deployed Starburst on top as this kind of abstraction layer, a single point of access, if you will, that takes the SQL query and can now join table A with table B, regardless of where those tables may live. So again, the viewing behavior in Hadoop and the billing data in the data warehouse. That allowed them to get access in seconds rather than the weeks and potentially months of work required to move that data around. What that has then allowed them to do as a next step is start to migrate to the cloud and actually take some tables off of that data warehouse and start to move it to S3 in AWS, and now have a single point of access across 3 different systems: their Hadoop data lake, their S3 data lake, and their Teradata system, all with providing a sort of uninterrupted experience for their analysts. Because at the end of the day, no analyst actually cares where the data lives. They just want to be able to get the results to their query. And so that's a big part of the type of value that we try to drive, really faster time to insights is the way we think about it.
Yeah, and I bet the architects love your solution too, because they no longer have to move data if they don't want to. And if they do, that change is definitely hidden from the users through the abstraction layer that you provide, right?
Exactly. We like to say that we're giving them optionality. We're putting them in control. Yep.
Great. Rai, you're up.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to remember the snake order here. So I would say the customer that comes to mind, just because we were talking about them earlier today, is a major gaming company. I won't name the name because I'm not entirely sure I'm allowed to share all this, but basically it's a game studio. They have dozens of platform games. They have mobile games, and they have a whole IT team, that's building a data platform. Generally, Airflow gets into the organization in a subversive way. Some team just decides to grab it and start using it. Sometimes those teams have DevOps people on them, and sometimes they don't. So generally, what we find is, when the DevOps talent isn't quite there, they'll look to a company like ours to help them, provide what we call a reliable Airflow dial tone. But in this case, it was a global analytics team that basically is pulling data from all the games, from all the sources, and trying to do marketing related work with that. And they just didn't have the DevOps desire, that perhaps other teams might have. Basically, we're finding, people are adopting Airflow for a wide variety of use cases. It's generally something analytics related to start with, but like I said earlier, I think it's the orchestrating retrainings of production ML algorithms that have been launched is a big deal, and can be pretty complicated too, considering all the data sources that need to flow into that ML retraining. So that's the one that comes to mind, because we were just talking about that literally an hour ago. So.
Would you say that the majority of your use cases are ML related, Rye?
No, I'd say that it's definitely the fastest growing percentage, but I would still say like there's a lot of blocking and tackling still in just pulling, ingesting data and moving it around. It's still probably the majority use case.
Perfect. All right, great, thanks.
Yep.
Chris, you're up.
Thank you, Wayne. So let me talk about two pharma companies. One I can mention, which is Celgene and now BMS, and another. And people come to us because I think in some ways they're really dissatisfied with how their data and analytic teams work, and they could be doing machine learning or data work, and it's not operating at the speed of business. And they've spent in some cases tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on different tool chains. Maybe 10 years ago they have a Teradata and an Informatica, and maybe now they've got a cloud, and they've got lots of tools to do ETL and data science. But the problem is it's not delivering results. And maybe they've read a book or heard about the idea of DevOps and Agile and are wondering, how do you apply that to my data and analytics team? How can I take and deploy whatever my model, my ETL code, my visualization really quickly from development to production instead of weeks, do it in hours? And then when something is in production, how do I know it works? And how do I not get yelled at when my customers find something wrong? And so for us, it's really about helping organizations move to the idea of how you get an agile and iterative and value-focused organization. And that is a technical problem, but it's also a people and process problem, how you organize your teams in that way. And in some way, Wayne, you drew an interesting graph several years ago about the adoption of sort of agile and DevOps ideas in software. And I think the data and analytics industry as a whole is behind on that. And in some ways, the point of our company is to try to move people forward, because just being a practitioner for so many years, I just don't like the kind of suffering that teams do, because they're all trying to, buy the best tools and operate in a very heroic manner. And I think that heroism is hurting our industry. And I think that's the idea of DataOps is the way to solve it.
Yeah, that heroism comment that you told me a while ago made me come up with that notion of that I mentioned earlier today, that we're moving from DataOps helps us move from an artisanal approach to a more industrial scale approach. I also think of that Intel Inside ad when it comes to DataKitchen. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say with DataKitchen, you guys don't do the data pipelines. You're what make the data pipelines possible. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we work with tools like Airflow because people love their tools, right? They love. There's people, I don't ever want to get in an R versus Python or Airflow versus DBT versus raw SQL versus Informatica argument or Power BI versus Tableau. I mean, people have standardized and love their tools. The problem that we really have in our industry is not between hands and keyboard of your individual contributor. It's about how your individual contributor can understand the systems that they work in so that they don't have to go to a bunch of meetings to get their job done, and they can work they can deploy quickly and understand the effects of their change. And then if it's in production, they don't get called up on, Friday afternoon when things go wrong and have to go fix it. And I think having lived all those pains, I think it's the lessons from industrial manufacturing and lean and agile all apply. And so there's just not a set of tools. If you try to do it in the DevOps ecosystem, a bunch of things break. And so we think there's a better way.
Great. Matthew, it's your turn now.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think if I could, I'll kind of illustrate Philip Morris International. I think it gives a good insight to the three major problems we try to solve as a company. So the first is there's this massive wave to move towards cloud compute. And the idea around this migration is to provide ad hoc access, right? So historically, we've had these isolated data teams where they would provide data products to end consumers in their line of business, or they're a smaller organization. And the problem is, as we get to petabyte scale data, so one is this volume problem, then two is a variety problem. I think in data engineering, people forget variety is actually a harder problem than volume. When you have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tables, you can't go tell me that it's just going to be really easy to join all this stuff together, right? And so you ad hoc access this data. The problem is that all that data came from somewhere, and probably in a large enterprise, there's 20, 30 years of rules on it. And a lot of those people are retired, and they built the DB environment or the Teradata or the Oracle warehouse, and now it's all migrating. The problem is how do you have consistent rules on any query? You might have tens of thousands of rules. How do you consistently enforce that, right? So which group has access to what based off what certification? So at PMI, the problem is they have a global refit from a training perspective. They need to analyze all their employees globally, and they need to know who do they need to train. So they need to merge financial data, HR data, all of who they're going to hire, what different organizations, what's the budget to go get people trained or potentially riff people and bring in new people based on that. So how do you apply rules across all these different data sets that are all in disparate legacy as well as modern cloud compute, so Snowflake, Databricks, and Hadoop infrastructure, and consistently enforce those rules dynamically? So that's one. The second is how do you guarantee a level of privacy? So a lot of these are European citizens, some are Chinese citizens. There's different residency rights and sovereignty rights on the data. But the second problem is like we don't want certain managers to create bias, right? And so we have automated privacy enhancing techniques in our platform where we can actually look at, as they're joining that data together, the combination of multiple columns where there's something called quasi-identifiers or indirect identifiers. So we could say, well, because of your race and the religion in there, and you've been in these trainings, we can uniquely identify you. And so we can actually remove and null out certain cells so that way those people couldn't be identified. And that's hundreds of columns and billions of rows. So we can automate that and mathematically prove it. So that and that was a single click of a button for an end user. And then the third is once I actually have these data products, I want to share that into a dashboard, right? To make decisions for some decision maker. How do I share that into a potentially third party, like if it's Looker in the cloud, that is going to have to be a contractual SLA around sharing of that product. So we can monitor who's accessing it and for what purpose are they accessing that data in these different dashboards. For HR, we can automatically provide more raw data. If it's a business decision maker in that dashboard, we can guarantee it will look differently. And then we actually have the audit logs in a report to say, hey, CNIL, or hey, German, Data Protection Authority, or hey, internal audit, we've complied and we can prove that. So that's kind of the three steps, if you call it, to kind of like a perfect customer for us there.
Yeah, that's what I would call a modern governance platform. All those features and functions you described are things that people desperately want to do, and they want it easy to do. And I know from looking at your tool, it's darn easy to do that.
Yeah. The expectation is that it has to be done in 10 minutes. That's the problem now. I mean, I think that's kind of what we all CEOs on here feel is the seamless interaction of tools, and they all want it to be automated.
So that's probably a good segue to our next question. But before I ask that, I just want to tell the audience that you're more than welcome to submit questions to this panel, and we will take them until we end here in about 15 minutes. So please use the Q&A tab and add a question. I'll be monitoring that. So for the panel, we're here to talk about DataOps and unleash DataOps, but I'm finding that there's still a lot of confusion about DataOps, what it is, what it isn't. I'm wondering if you could, and I'm not going to pick people here, so first one to jump in, we'll start it. What is the biggest misconception about DataOps that you're finding out in the marketplace today?
Well, William, I can take that. I think the biggest misconception is nobody knows what it is. And so, I can tell you how I feel about that because I've got two feelings. One is we've been trying to talk about the concepts behind DataOps for 7 or 8 years. And actually, when we first started to develop the DataOps manifesto and talked about it with Kunal, there was nobody who even knew the word. We'd go to conferences and we'd wear chef hats and give out wooden spoons, and people would laugh at us like we're some middle-aged aliens. Data, what? What are you talking about? And so it's so the fact that we're having a conference and people are using the word is fantastic on the marketer side of me. But the engineers wants a precise definition of how this thing works and what are the problems. And I think, like any gas, marketing terms have expanded, and so DataOps is confusing because some people put it on, the tools that they built 10 years ago. They put the DataOps moniker on it. And so I think the biggest challenge is confusion about what the term means. And I think, but the thing that there's not confusion on, I think, is that people want their teams who do data and analytics to deliver more value to their customers, and do that in a faster time, and to increase customer data trust. And I think every organization is feeling that pain. And so I think DataOps is the way to address it, but it's still hard because it's and to a certain extent, a lot of tech terms are like that, but it's confusing for some people.
Yeah, I'd say of tech terms, this is a big one, in terms of confusion. And I have found that if you don't focus on the functionality as much, but you focus on the outcome, it's pretty simple. The outcome for me is faster, better, cheaper, which is what customers have been asking us to deliver for 30 years in this space. And we haven't really done that. I see DataOps really as finally a hope for us to achieve that holy grail.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that, I think definitions aside and buzzwords aside, if you just heard all of our solutions out here, I think the goal is what we were just talking about, right? It's taking a business idea, a valuable business idea, right, and implementing that quickly and reliably, and doing that in a repeatable way, so everybody in the business can enjoy that, right? I think we're coming to that point where people are realizing that data is going to be a game changer, and every company is now turning into a data company. They just want to be able to realize that value from that data quickly, right? And I think that's what DataOps enables. So if you look at any of these companies out here, I think at the end of the day, that's ultimately what we're trying to do out here.
Yeah, what I always go back to, I don't know how many people played with IBM InfoStreams, right? But back in the day, we have to go back to quality of service, right? I feel like, especially modern warehousing, there's an expectation of quality and an expectation of SLAs as we deliver data products. And I think that when I think of DataOps, I think it's in the spirit of it is we're getting back to what are the services and programmatics necessary to deliver dependable data pipelines and data products. And I think there's a whole ecosystem of tools and infrastructure that need to exist, as well as human services around that and organizational structure to be able to deliver that. And so I think big data and the whole big data hype cycle somewhat distorted that for a while, but I think we're coming right back to how do we deliver reliable and well-defined data products to the consumer or to the business. And I think that's kind of the spirit of it. And the misconception is that it's easy.
Oh, sorry.
Well, your tools are all going to make it completely easy, right?
I was going to mention the misconception, and it ties into the easy thing. Is I think some people think that data ops is a solved problem. We've been doing data operations for so many years, and it's a lot different in the environment now versus I remember working and all of our data was in a closet, right next to all the humans, and now it's all smeared out across so many applications and locations and clouds, and there's so many constituents up for the data now, and so many different concerns, what they're trying to do with it. So many vendors, as we've mentioned, and it's just basically the problem today is there's this fast-moving graph, that nobody has the full view of. It has to be fresh, correct, secure, accessible, and it's just the game has changed so much that solutions from yesteryear are made irrelevant. But some people think that this is just a solved problem, and I'm sure no one here would agree with that.
No, that's true for the old timers with a lot of gray hair. We're still stuck back in the 90s where it was ETL was your pipeline, data warehouse was your target. Right? Maybe if you were aggressive, you had some virtual cubes. But But yeah, things are much different today.
Yeah, and the process of delivering value from analytics doesn't live in one department, right? There's big central teams, and then there's self-service organizations around who are doing almost everything with data, right? And then there's people who are, hundreds, if not thousands of people in the organization are somewhere on that graph that's delivering value from source to the end customer. And how do you make that work? And like, how do you tell if I change one thing that I'm going to break anything else in that graph? And so that's the problem, is like, we're kind of hoping that everything works. And when we make a change, we're like, and I can't tell you how often we talk to customers and the hair stands on my head when I hear they have their data's pouring into this big complex network of tools and people and technology, and they don't know if it works. And they're just waiting they're dreading going into work because they're going to get that email saying the system's broke. And then they're going to have to point fingers. And as a result, like, CDOs have a very short tenure and teams aren't happy. And I think it's because we've got to devote cycles to the people and process on how we work, much like software is done.
Yeah, I don't want to pour into this because I don't want to run out of time, but I think Chris just hit the nail on the head. This is what I always tell people. It's the email. Like, it's toil, right? If you go with like Google's terms, like, you got to remove toil out of the system. If you're using email to tell someone something's broke, that's fine for a business. But like, having literally been there, I'm about to hit a house and, there's 60 pounds of high explosive in the second floor of the building. And, the pipeline broke, and so we sent the wrong data, and that's what drove the analytics and put us in there. It's unacceptable, right? We need real-time understanding of when things break, how do we resolve that issue? In today's age, we might lose some money. In the future, though, it might mean that a autonomous car takes a right turn instead of a left turn. And I think just where the world's going is we have to get out of email. We have to get humans out of the loop. The question is, how do we automate all of these systems to be near perfect?
That's interesting. When I wrote my last book, I interviewed a guy who was building data marts for General Schwarzkopf in the first Iraq War. And I like to say his data marts were life and death data marts. They really.
Yeah, literally. I remember in Camp Liberty, that was actually where Hadoop really started, was because we need to pump $36 million into a bunch of guys from Yahoo because our containers kept overheating in 2006 in Baghdad,
So I think the moral of the story is that we have to treat all of our data marts as life and death data marts, right?
Exactly.
All right, so last question, guys. Let's just take your crystal balls out and what do you think will be the biggest development in the DataOps space in the next 12 months? This will give you a chance to be a resident prognosticator, and we'll get back in a year and we'll see how well you did.
Well, I can start. All right, you want to go? I'm fine, waiting.
I'll just go quickly. Who knows but I'll just throw this out there. And I'm not sure how much progress we'll make in the year, but it's kind of a wish in a way. But that we'll see a more sophisticated exchange and utilization of, I call it like data metadata. And we need a name for that because it's redundant. But there's this wide range of needs, from lineage, provenance, and governance, and data discovery, and quality, privacy, trust, communicating progress of tasks. Like, there's so many reasons why having better metadata around these systems would be great. And for my part, I'm going to try to do better from Airflow's perspective, but I hope it happens kind of across the board.
Terrific. Who's next?
Yeah. I'll jump. So I think what's interesting, having sort of watched the space for a bunch of years, is that over the past several years, there's a bunch of model ops companies have come on. And recently, this last year, there's a bunch of companies that have done sort of data monitoring, data testing, or observability, where they're actually checking the data itself to see if it's right, which is great. And so my prediction is that there's actually going to be even more ops out there. So the use of the term data GovOps is going to be there, and data SecOps and more of, you can almost plot the analogies to what happened in the software DevOps market to the data ops market. So there's going to be more pure play ops vendors in the data ops space using the ops term. And so data GovOps, data SecOps, in addition to model ops and now data observability.
I don't know if you guys noticed that, but Wayne was starting to get a headache right about that time, hearing all of these different ops words, in addition to everything else he has to cover already. So I'll do one quick. I think we need to move towards automation again. Back to what everybody was saying, right? So automating all those different steps, from planning a pipeline to creating a pipeline to delivering and maintaining those different pipelines, right? And I think where we need to go next is then not to be reactive, but to be proactive. So putting some predictability into the automation as well, right? Can you predict things are going to break? Can you predict that errors are going to happen, that drifts are going to happen in your data sets, right? So just like Rye, it's more of a wish list item for me. I'm sure we'll make some progress over the next year along these lines as well. But I think that's where the state needs to get to, because if you look at the talent pool availability in the market, not everybody is an expert. So even if you provide them all the data after the fact, there's very few people that can actually understand it and act on it. So with that automation and predictability, I think we'll have just more reliable, scalable pipelines out there.
So Kunal, that's an interesting idea. But what about taking that one step further and saying not just predictive capabilities, but let's have autonomous data pipelines, ones that can self-correct, self-heal.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
that'll happen when my autonomous car drives me through Boston.
Yeah,
I would never get that car, especially if it's snowing.
Boston. Yeah, without an autonomous vehicle. The one I was just going to add, and this pertains a little bit more to the analytics and data warehousing space. I think to add yet another buzzword, you may start to hear the word lakehouse get used more and more. And this is really about the convergence of data lakes and data warehouse. And I think what's making that possible, what's driving that to a reality, is really the emergence of file formats that allow for updates and deletes. That was always kind of the limiting factor on the data lake, is not being able to do updates and deletes. So you couldn't really modify the data and do active data warehousing the way a traditional data warehouse would. But the three formats to watch for anyone interested are Iceberg, which came out of Netflix, Delta, which came out of Databricks, and then Hootie, which came out of Uber. And those three in particular have added the ability to do updates and deletes. And so now combining those file formats with a tool like ours, but also other tools, you can actually do, what approaches traditional data warehousing style workloads against data in its data lake. And I think that will be pretty big.
I guess I'm the last man standing. Yeah, to kind of pivot on Justin and Rye, I think at the end of the day, I do agree with this level of integration between the different tool sets at the orchestration layer, the transform layer, and then the core data infrastructure. I think what customers, small and big, want is a relatively consistent framework to be able to seamlessly deploy that to get a data platform up and running quickly. And so I think this year, the capital in the market is going to tell us to do it. And so I think there'll be effective metadata communication between that core data infrastructure layer, the lakehouse, if you will, the orchestration layer that's riding these transform jobs, and then the tools that are enabling transform, metadata management, entitlement and security, observability, and then quality and testing. I think that will just kind of rack and stack together.
Yeah, as someone who's watched markets for a long time, I would have to say, just jumping on that, Matthew, that we'll probably see a lot more convergence among purpose-built tools. At the same time, we'll start to see more purpose-built tools come on the market with new approaches to things as new technologies come and as people learn how to leverage AI better. I also think we'll start to see these data pipelines and your tools become more self-service oriented. easier to use for lesser skilled folks to make them more pervasive. All right, I think we are officially out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists for attending, for their thoughts, observations, and great insights, and to our audience for listening in.